My name is Breandán O'Caoimh. I'm a Kerry-based human geographer. I live just outside Carsavine, over the water, as they call it here locally. I grew up on a dairy farm in East Kerry. My brother is farming there now. He has suckler cattle. I've always been interested in the land, always been interested in farming. And I suppose that's what brought me to geography. I worked in rural development for many years. Then I studied human geography and went on to become a lecturer in geography in Mary Immaculate College, University of Limerick. And then in 2018, I set up my own research consultancy, working mainly in social research. I'm glad you talked about the nostalgia, if you like, the cultural significance and the importance of the peatlands and the bog. Bogs are very beautiful places. They're places of energy, places of biodiversity, places of beauty, and places that are really important in the culture and the identity of people in Kerry, right throughout the West, the Midlands. Our bogs are in the uplands and the Midlands, they're in the lowlands, and they're very much intertwined with the local economy. And if you look at the farming economy, the rural economy in the past, people were more self-sufficient than they are now. We had less food miles, less travel, less greenhouse gas emissions, and we had a local fuel source. It's important to remember that aspect of the bogs. As well as that, it was a great place for social contact. Some men like my dad were very good at the sláán, cutting the turf. I preferred to spread the turf. I remember my grandmother was great at stooking the turf, getting it up off the ground. So I have memories, that are part of my cultural identity, and I'm sure those are shared by many people here and across Ireland, and indeed in other countries where bogs are part of the identity. And they're part of our identity, part of our economy, part of the rural. So it's important that we celebrate that, it's important that we conserve it, it's important that we remember it. But we're also cognizant of our abilities to adapt, our ability to, I suppose, take into account the knowledge that we're getting from science, take into account the tacit, the local knowledge, and to complement that with the scientific knowledge that we're now getting from the various researchers who have pointed out that greenhouse gas emissions do emanate from turf as well as from other sources. So if we're serious about sustainability, if we're serious about rural livelihoods, we have to play our part. And if the commercial exploitation of our bogs needs to be tempered or needs to be reduced, well then we have to play our part in that regard. But we need to do it in a way that's respectful of communities. We need to use more carrot than stick. We need to talk to people. We need to explain the science. We need to have conversations. And in my research, as a human geographer, as a social scientist, I see the value of bringing people with you on a particular journey. Because, people, as I was saying earlier on, they value the bogs. There's a historical heritage, identity, a connection with those places. We don't want to see them exploited. We want to see them, respected, but we also need to respect the right of rural people to make a living. So I suppose in terms of the way forward, it's about that partnership, it's about collaboration, it's about the state, the private sector, the communities, the landowners working together. So if farmers are not allowed to sell turf, well then they need to be compensated for the loss of income. And in my research, for example, I have looked at the Kerry Life programme. At the moment I'm also studying the Corncrake Life, and in those projects I have seen how farmers were compensated for the loss of earnings because they had to set aside land say in the case of the corncrake, that they have to mow their meadows later in the year so that the grass can grow and the corncrake can lay her eggs, and that the fledglings can hatch and so on, rather than the farmer cutting his or her hay in May and June. They might now do it in August or September. Obviously there's an income foregone there, so the farmer is compensated for that. And that solution was derived through people sitting down, working together, being respectful. And it's something similar we need to have that collaborative approach to the boglands as well. The largest challenge, I suppose, is that we have had a tradition here of using sledgehammers to crack nuts. And what I mean by that is that we're a very centralised state. It's Napoleonic in terms of the way decision making operates. And too often decisions are made in Dublin and then rolled out across the country as if everywhere were the same. We're not respecting local identity, not respecting local geography, local lifestyles, local knowledge, and so on. So I would be fearful that a plan would be devised in Kildare Street or in Merrion Street or wherever, and then people would be expected in South Kerry to apply that. Whereas if we had a more decentralised form of government, as they have in many European countries, people could sit down at a local level and devise solutions that are appropriate. Because here, as I said, we have the upland bogs in the Midlands, it's a different thing. And then I'm also concerned that, while, yes, we know that the burning of peat contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, the biggest exploiter of the boglands wasn't the farmer or the upland communities or families who use it for their own fuel source, that local economy. It was actually the state. It was Breandán O'Caoimh, a state company that was established during the emergency when Ireland needed, during the World War II, when we couldn't import fuel, so we were exploiting our bogs. But that exploitation was excessive. It persisted into the 1960s, 70s, indeed even in the 1980s. I remember a time when Breandán O'Caoimh, the state company, was actually selling peat moss for people to put in their gardens. Now that sounds perverse today. So it was the state that, in the main, and I don't have the specific figures, but what percentage of our boglands was extracted and exploited by the state and the state commercial company. So that carbon sink has been lost. And now that we know the value of that carbon sink, and maybe they did back then or maybe they didn't, it's not for me to judge, it's smaller farmers and upland communities that are now expected to make a bigger adjustment to compensate for something that they didn't do between the 1950s and 1980s. The answer is the answer is not just in the outcome, but in the way we come to that answer. So the process is important. Now that sounds maybe like a bit of jargon, but I don't have the answer. I have a part of the answer. You have a part of the answer. The man and woman who are farming, the people who work in the bogs, they have part of the answer as well. The scientists have some of the answers. The local authority may have some of the answers. So it's about all of us sitting down together and see what is the best way to protect our bogs, protect our environment, protect our livelihoods here in Ivara, in Kerry, and in other communities, doing it the best way for themselves as well. It may mean finding a new, I suppose, economic outlet for the bogs. There's people doing amazing things now in nature, putting a new value. There's things like sea swimming. There are people going forest bathing. Why not bog bathing, bog snorkeling? These things they're all part of the mix. I'm open to other suggestions and so on, but I think the bogs have an intrinsic value, yes. correct. But it's important that we respect the people, the families who've owned those bogs, who have protected them for generations. And as I said, if there is a loss of income to those families, well, then that needs to be compensated in some way, because we know that biodiversity is hugely valuable. Yeah, it's about community development, and yeah, I do agree with you that I'd like to hear you using the word community, but it, this issue around bogs is just a microcosm of so many of the other issues we're facing. If you look at, say, the encroachment of rhododendron, if you look at biodiversity, if you look at fishing, if you look at other elements of land use and farming, if you look at spatial planning, housing, the Irish language, whatever issue it is, the same processes are transferable. And those processes need to be bottom up, they need to be community based, they need to respect local knowledge, local know-how, roundtable, conversation, partnership, working together, and then the resources and the investments then put into what comes from those local deliberations. It's impossible for me to talk about turf without talking about my grand-aunt Hannah Kelleher. She used to put down the fire in my grandmother's house. She was a great cook, wonderful lady, and she had the fire going early in the morning. She had the range. It wasn't an open fire. It was a range in my time. I'm sure it's an open fire before then. And the turf fire heated the house, but it also heated the oven. So they cooked the dinner on the range, and then in the afternoon, when the range was still hot, they baked. So they had fresh bread every day. So the fuel was used very efficiently. And then I remember in the evening time, the table was moved from where it was over by the window up near the range. Again, just efficiency, sense, and then the different words they had for the different sizes and shapes of turf. A small piece of turf was a kieran, and we used to, I remember my cousins and my brothers and sisters, throwing kierans at one another and fighting, and then turf dust then to, that had its value. So, and then I remember, of course, going to the bog, and as I mentioned to you, my dad was very good at the slán, a real quick turf cutter, and my Uncle Dermot then had another bank near us, and our cousins used to come, and we were cutting our bank and they were cutting their bank, and then across the road then we could see Jack Kelleher cutting his, and it was a place where you could meet people, and there certainly was a social dimension to it. And I'm sure other people who've talked to you about their time in the bogs have talked to you about drinking tea, and the taste of tea in the bog is different to the taste of tea in anywhere you could ever drink tea. And I remember my grandmother bringing the tea to us in the bog in bottles with socks around them to keep the tea warm, and it was laced with sugar, and it tasted different, and the currant cakes and the scones and the currant scones and that, it just, yeah, it was a very happy place, despite the work being onerous. There's a lot of bending down, and this was one of the challenges that we used to have always was, first of all, the weather, and timing, do you cut in April, do you cut in May, all this kind of thing. And then if the year was wet, the turf was in the bog longer, and it was, laid out in the rows longer. But as the summer was going on, the grass would be growing on the bank. So you're trying to get the turf upright quicker, as quick as possible, so that the rushes and the other grasses wouldn't be growing up through it, and undoing the work that you had done. So I remember that being a challenge. Some of the bad years that we had in the 80s in particular. So yeah, good memories despite the hard work indeed. Yeah. I burn wood at the moment. Um, you know, it doesn't affect me in the sense that I'm not farming, um, but I do understand where farmers are at, and I say farmers who have bogland, who got their fuel source locally, um, and I do think we need to respect and listen to them and to talk to them. I can read the science, understand the science, respect the science, and I can see the correlation between the burning of turf and the emission of greenhouse gases. You know, they're not the only people emitting greenhouse gases. Indeed, what's the proportion? You know, so that's a factor. I think we need to look at the totality of conservation. We need to look at bogs, waterways, our hedgerows. All of these are important. The bogs are one piece of the jigsaw. Let's stay on the bogs, so, and let's stay with the heather. We're spoiled for choice. You know,
They're all good choices.
there's so much. There's so
Yes,
much.
you have an
I
incredibly
particularly
rich
like the heather,
heritage.
and I'm just, it's my, just an opinion. Another one of the opinions. Let's talk about it and see what the others. Um, I like heather because you have heather that flowers in the spring and you have heather that flowers in the winter, and it's just the color. And when the purple and yellow heathers, purple and white heather flower at the same time as the gorse, and you have those three colors on the side of the mountain. There's just there's no artist can compete with that.
And the incredible fragrances that
Yes,
come from
absolutely.
all
And the honey and the honeybee. Let's begin by listening, and let's create a space in which we can hear local voices in particular. And we're doing that here this week, and I'm really admiring of Anita and everybody else who has created the space here in Carsavine to do that. It's really, really important, and it needs to be recognised and it needs to be built upon. But as I say, we need to do it for everything. This needs to be the approach. We cannot be waiting for Dublin or Brussels or whomever to give us a model and say, there, go and apply that. No. No, it doesn't work. I think we need to take stock as soon as possible. We need to document the learnings. We need to create a network of everybody who participated to a greater or lesser extent, and then continue to share our knowledge, and keep coming together as systematically as we possibly can, and grow that network. And then, at the moment the activities are, and rightly so, beginning in Carsavine, but we need to go out to some of the other communities as well. I'm thinking of Glencar and Drummond and so on, where the boglands are interwoven with the non-boglands. It's a particular landscape there. Places like Hathorbridge as well, and have conversations in their spaces, in their terms. I think we need to do that.